Hello, I'm David from Barclays.
He's lying.
I'm currently in the process of upgrading your account.
No, he isn't.
So I just need your full password.
No, he doesn't. It's a scam.
Once I've got that, I can send you a link to access the account.
That's also a scam. Every year, millions are lost to fraud. At Barclays, we'll never ask for your full password or PIN, so never give it out.
Thanks for your time.
At least that's true.
It is, of course, Talk Radio.
The Independent Republic of Mike Graham on Talk Radio.
Time to say a very, very good morning to Mr. Peter Hitchens. Peter, how the devil are you?
Morning, so far so good. Thanks.
Yeah, how's the weather in your neck of the woods? Because I keep being told by these people that we've had an extraordinary level of weather events lately, which is what we used to call weather. It's now weather events, apparently.
Well, that's, of course, if you decide that there is a pattern in things, then you will see everything forming part of it. As far as I know, there's no actual objective measurable test which connects the supposedly extreme weather events of the past few years with climate change, and I'd be interested to see if anybody can produce anything which does so. But it's become, as with so many things to do with that subject, both fashionable and pretty much compulsory to say that these things are connected. So that's what everybody now believes. The extraordinary spread of the religion of Greta Thunberg is absolutely amazing. It's now, I think, captured almost every part of the media, all parts of the education system, everywhere else. And my own view is always, when confronted with any kind of unanimous opinion, to wonder whether it oughtn't to be challenged. But it is extraordinary how difficult it is to do so. And the moment you see, or you are, indeed, I'm sure there are people watching this who are already preparing to ring you up and accuse me of being a climate change.
Oh, of course. Of course
A
there will be.
phrase deliberately chosen, by the way, as a smear, because it was originally used quite properly against people who denied the mass murder of European Jews by Hitler.
Yes.
Who were called Holocaust deniers.
Right.
So that is what they do. They deny that it happened. And the use of this phrase is a deliberate attempt to set up in the mind of the listener an idea that anybody who is at all doubtful about this is an evil person. Not just a wrong person, but an evil person, a bad person who is, for wicked reasons, denying a proven truth. And I don't want to argue about this here, but it's a very unpleasant way of proceeding. And whenever another thing I notice is whenever anybody who's opposing you in an argument resorts to tactics of this kind, it's usually a sign that they're not entirely sure of their own case.
No, that's absolutely right. Because I was watching yesterday evening, because I can't be bothered getting up early enough to watch it in the morning, Andrew Marr's interview with Greta Thunberg, Saint Greta, as some people would like to call her. And it was possibly the most ludicrously soft interview I think I've ever seen. There were the narrative was not questioned. My question to everybody is, what exactly is net zero? What is the point of attaining it? And what will it actually achieve for the rest of the world? Because I fear the answer to all of those things is going to be very disappointing for the people who are trying to push it.
Yes, I didn't see it. The question I would persistently ask her over and over again is, why doesn't she spend more time in China trying to explain to the Chinese government that its enormous coal-burning program is bad, and to see what happens when she does so. She could try, if she just thinks quite reasonably that China is a repressive police state which murders its own people in Tiananmen Square, then she might try India, which is a democracy, and see how she gets on there. Or indeed Australia, which is, again, a heavy producer of coal, and not entirely signed up to this program. It's here we have this extraordinary spectacle of a British government and several European governments shutting down the use of coal, and in the case of Germany, shutting down the use of nuclear power, an act close to insanity in my view. While the rest of the world, particularly the biggest growing industrial power, China, and the biggest established industrial power, United States, continue to use coal and to expand nuclear power, which makes all our sacrifices meaningless.
Well, quite.
But if you want a meaningless sacrifice, then it seems to me that's fine by me. If you want to make meaningless sacrifices in your own life, of your own comfort and safety and security and prosperity, then go ahead and do it.
Yeah.
Become a hermit. Go walking around the country wearing a loincloth. But don't make me do it.
Yeah.
if all it is a futile gesture. And it's the futile gestures that irritate me.
Yes, well, that's the same with me. I mean, it seems to me that the Boris Johnson administration has now finally reached peak nonsensical behaviour, because this is actually what they're all about. You know, having a big meeting at which they're going to produce apparently more carbon than the whole of Scotland does in an entire year, thanks to all of the various jets that are flying in and out and all the various cars. I mean, the idea that Joe Biden is flying in on Air Force One with 85 cars in his motorcade to tell everybody to stop wasting energy seems to not really be in any way ironic to anyone else, apart from you and I.
The car issue is fascinating, as is the aircraft issue. Now, you may know I'm actually a very, very strong advocate of railways above roads, because they're immensely more efficient. And this has nothing to do, as far as I'm concerned, with climate change. It's a general benefit to the quality of the air, to the reduction of noise, and indeed to the beauty of the countryside and the pleasantness of our cities. And I've had this opinion for many, many years, long before global heating was invented as a crisis. And I stick to it. But here we have a government which claims to be absolutely frenziedly committed to a green target, which has just frozen fuel duty again. It's frozen fuel duty for the perfectly sensible reason that if it actually let fuel duty rise to the level it ought to have risen to given inflation, then there would probably be riots in the streets, because so many people depend on their cars to get around, because this government, and governments for many years before it, has designed this country around the car. If you want to get around this country now, that if you don't go by car, first of all, it'll be very difficult, and secondly, it'll be very expensive. Yeah. Same goes for aircraft. And it's incredibly expensive to travel abroad by train, as Greta Thunberg quite rightly does. But it's incredibly cheap to do it by air. This is also because of the tax structure followed by the government, which claims to be green. If you want to be practically green, as I believe I am, then you should encourage the use of trains and trams and bicycles, and discourage the use of cars and aeroplanes, except where absolutely necessary. By creating... Or
if you've got your own. Obviously.
You have to create an infrastructure, as they do, for instance, in Switzerland. We really don't need a car, but we do what the Dutch have done and create roads where it's safe to ride a bicycle. This great frenzy I constantly get. I was filmed by Jeremy Vine last week riding my bicycle without a helmet, and was pelted with abuse for hours. Why don't you wear a helmet? Because let's not argue about it all now, but I don't think it's a valuable thing to do. But
it's entirely up to you, isn't it? Up to you if you want to wear a helmet?
It is up to me at the moment, yes. So in Australia and New Zealand, parts of Australia and New Zealand, it's compulsory, and as a result, bicycle use has fallen with terrible effects on public health. But here's the point. In the Netherlands, where bicycle use is incredibly widespread, hardly anybody wears a helmet, for the simple reason the main danger to cyclists is not by going around without a polystyrene bowl on your styrofoam bowl on your head. The main danger to cyclists is by being hit by a car.
Yeah.
If that happens, then I promise you, having a styrofoam bowl on your head isn't going to do you much good. But people aren't hit by cars in the Netherlands because they have a sensible structure which allows people, including children, to bicycle safely around towns and around the countryside. Yeah. You can't do that here. And this is a government which claims to be green that could take these steps to change the country for the better. 50 years ago, the Netherlands was just like Britain. The cyclists lived in terror of cars, and the car ruled, and they changed it. If they took these steps, they would actually do some good. As it is, they just follow dogmas.
Right, but it's green. But it's green on paper only, isn't it? Because as Rod Little pointed out last week in his column, the beaches of our country are pretty well filled with sewage in some parts, and because we haven't got the wherewithal to enforce regulations on water companies who would prefer... Well, no, we haven't, because they prefer to pay the fine because it's cheaper than changing the system. So they keep doing it.
But this is, again, why it seems to me that intelligent conservatives should never have been in favour of privatisation. The water companies have been one of the most classic examples of the extraction of wealth from a major resource without any particular responsibility towards the country. When we still had nationalised or as it was, quasi-state-run water, you could have had some influence over their behaviour. But as soon as they were privatised, the entire reason for their existence was to make money for their shareholders, which is what private companies do. So, sure, the calculation is there. We'll pay the fines and spread sewage on every available nearby surface. And that's fine by us. What are you worried about? The people who are doing this don't live anywhere near the sewage.
No.
They do.
And that's the terrible thing. I mean, that awful footage of the pipe that was somewhere, I think, in going out into the southern part of the coast of the UK for 49 hours. I mean, it just beggars belief.
Well, I wish it did. But you see what they do with the rivers as well. They're constantly being pulled up for it, but there's no incentive for them to do it. And they're also surprisingly interested in fixing leaks. Whenever you find a major leak,
oh my God, yeah,
bring them up and ask them. Nothing will happen because they in their calculations, this really isn't worth the bother. If they were still publicly owned, I don't think this would happen. It's the same with the railways and a number of other things. It was a mistake to privatise them, and I'm sick and tired of people who claim to be conservatives defending this. And the members of Parliament who voted not to strengthen regulations against sewage, I think, made fools of themselves. It really is necessary for some things to be run for the public good rather than for private good, and water and railways are two of them.
And I think energy, perhaps in general, is because of all the ridiculous notions that we now have to buy into and we have to follow and swallow. That we've got a cap on the prices, but it doesn't actually seem to stop the price from going up. So it's not really a cap, is it?
I think there is a strong case for nationalised energy, and I've never seen any particular advantage to me or any other consumer I know in having it any other way. If you might get some reductions by this ridiculous ability to switch from place to place, but they don't last.
No.
And as we see, the companies which offer them, when trouble comes, go belly up and hand you over to somebody else. It's not a long-term reduction.
No.
If you wanted a long-term reduction in the cost of energy, you would have a serious national energy corporation, which, for instance, would by now have developed a proper fleet of modern nuclear power stations, which I think this country badly needs to keep itself free from pressure from both Middle Eastern tyrants and from Vladimir Putin. You need these things, but unless you've got a serious national direction, it won't happen. Again, we did have a very, very good nuclear power industry and a body of knowledge and of skilled people who knew how to handle it, and that's all been dispersed since privatisation, just as a huge number of the best railway engineers were dispersed on privatisation of the railways.
Yes, quite. Now, you and I haven't had a chance to speak about the budget because I missed you last week. I was on breakfast, but I mean, I dare say you, like me, might have been asking the question last Wednesday afternoon. Well, if we'd known exactly how much this was going to cost, we might not have been quite so keen on locking everybody away.
Well, again, as with all budgets, people look at it and the newspapers come up with the figures, and it looks pretty terrifying. But it's when these new taxes actually bite, and when the inflation actually bites in people's lives, generally in the dismal months, March and April, that people will really feel the pain. So far, I think we're still in the fool's paradise of imagining that all those months of shutting down the economy were cost-free. And I just have to again say, because as you know, my chief pleasure in life as I grow older and older, I told you so. I said there would be more and higher taxes, and I said there would be inflation, and these things have duly arrived. It wasn't very difficult to predict it, and they're going to be colossal. And the damage that these things will do to the health service, which everybody thought they were or were told they were saving, will be of course considerable. Because every time there's serious inflation, the health service becomes less able to pay for itself, and the more that taxes go up, the more pressure there is on the exchequer, and actually the less money there is to go around.
Yeah.
It just isn't going to be good for any of the things people claim they were taking all those sacrifices for.
No, I fear that's true. Your main piece this week was about Archbishop Welby and his inability or his unwillingness, if you like, to admit to something. Tell us about that.
Well, it's a preoccupation of mine. I think that sometimes in one's life a case comes in front of you which you have to do something about. I have for many years been an admirer of the late Bishop George Bell of Chichester, not, I hasten to say, to be in any way confused with the disgusting Bishop Peter Bull, a convicted paedophile. George Bell was a man really of the Edwardian age who lived into modern times. Tremendously brave, supporter of German anti-Nazis in the German church before the war. Also a champion of the oppressed in a really genuinely courageous way, and also the man who opposed, which I think was essential for our national pride and our national conscience, opposed the bombing of German civilians during the Second World War, which cost him the Archbishopric of Canterbury, which he would otherwise have got. He was a very brilliant and much loved man. And a few years ago, an accusation was made against him that he'd sexually abused a girl. The problem with the accusation was it was made something in the region of 60 years after the events alleged. He wasn't around to contest it. The accusation was pretty much immediately accepted as true by the Church of England, which then made a public payment to the complainant. I suspect the complainant was actually abused by somebody, by the way, but not by George Bell. And I was part of a group which protested against this because we felt there'd be no proper examination of the case and no presumption of innocence. And eventually the brilliant QC, Lord Carlisle, wrote a report on it which demolished the case against him. But Justin Welby, who'd been deeply involved in this case, has always been very unwilling to admit that he was totally wrong and continues to insist that what he calls a significant cloud hangs over George Bell just because the accusation was made. Now, a point I made on Sunday was even the Soviet Union, even the Kremlin, eventually rehabilitated all the people it smeared in show trials in the 1930s. All the Church of England needs to do is to say, yes, we were totally wrong, we had no case for this, but he won't do it. And now it turns out, and this is completely fascinating, I should show this is what our sister paper, the Daily Mail, and you see this.
Just move it slightly closer to your face. There you go. That's it.
Yeah. It's an extraordinary story about how Justin Welby, when he was Dean of Liverpool Cathedral, resisted the claims of the man who alleged that he was being abused by a paedophile priest. Now, this priest actually already had a conviction for indecent assault, but Justin Welby, rather than listening to the complainant, eventually barred him from the cathedral because he said he was being obstreperous. No doubt the man did get quite angry, but the fact is that Justin Welby is now Archbishop of Canterbury, and the lawyers involved in these several cases against this person say that his actions were, well, how should I put it, inadequate. Now, the fascinating thing about this is, although the Daily Mail has published it, and although it touches on the behaviour of the chief prelate of the Church of England, it has very little publicity. It seems to me that having made a mistake of that nature, which I think is undeniable as a mistake, that Justin Welby doesn't really have the position to sit in judgment on other people.
No, but like a lot of people,
he can't pose as a righteous judge if he did that. And I think that he should, in all humility, he should. One of the things he should do is to admit his own human failings, and stop claiming that a cloud hangs over the reputation of a man who I have to say is almost immeasurably greater than Justin Welby ever was or ever will be.
Yes, but again, his position, like many positions now in Britain, is one of sort of protecting people from him making any kind of judgment which might be considered to be, unwise or possibly slightly unwoke, and he's more interested in how people think he's doing than he actually is, and he doesn't seem to be running the Church of England as if it's a church at all.
Well, I think the Church of England has many problems, but the problem, of course, is its biggest problem of all is that most people don't care whether it lives or dies and don't ever darken its doors. So we would probably get many of your listeners to switch off if we went into a detailed discussion of it. I just feel that in this case, here is a very important figure in public life who needs to make a proper restitution to somebody who was wronged, and will not do so. And I feel that under the circumstances when it's now shown that he himself has performed less than perfectly, he should be under even more pressure to make this act of restitution. And I would say very much that this is something which, as a leader of the Christian Church, it is his absolute duty to do. And so every chance that I get, I make this point. Yeah. I have no personal stake in this. I'm not related to George Bell. It's nothing to do with me. I just feel very strongly that injustice was done to a great and good man, and it should be put right. It's my Dreyfus case. I mean, most journalists eventually end up finding some case in which they feel that injustice has been done, and they'll pursue it till it's put right. And this may not be very big to most people, but it's big to me, and I think it's important. And here it is. I'll say it again, Archbishop Welby. The time has come to actually admit that you made a mistake here and fully restore and rehabilitate the reputation of the great Bishop George Bell of Chichester. Yes. A man, as I say, a much greater leader of the Church of England than you are.
Yes, well, I think a very good point, very well made. Peter, good to talk to you again. Thank you very much indeed. Peter Hitchens there with his take on the events of the week, his